Wingapo, you are watching the Seattle Indian Health Board's Indigenous Peoples Fest. Seattle is Native Land. And this is the BLM Native and Black Solidarity panel. I'm Azie. I'm Pamunkey and Black. I'm an actor and a television writer and producer, and I'm also a big nerd. I love history. I love Black history. I love Native history and our culture and community. So I'm so happy to be here hosting this panel with you all today. So this panel is part of a lot of ongoing and longstanding work in the Indigenous and Black community and communities to remind us all of our connections, our shared struggles, and to begin planning a Black and Native future together. So please feel free to interact with us in the chat. This is very casual. This is just a nice, visit between friends. And some of your questions may be featured later in the program. I'd like to take a minute before we get started to thank our sponsors, For Culture, Planned Parenthood, Friends of the Waterfront, Seattle Foundation, ACLU Washington, and Sanka. All right, so today we have two panelists. The first one is Keisha Erwin, Quapaw Kesis. She is Jamaican and urban Nîhithaw, Woods Cree Nation, and a band member of the Lac La Ronge Indian Band in northern Saskatchewan. They are a non-binary youth in the process of reclaiming a two-spirit identity, and their work focuses on navigating oppression and multiple identities. We also have Amber Starks. Amber is someone who you may know on social media as Melanin Muscogee. She's Afro-Indigenous activist and organizer, cultural critic, commentator, student of decolonial theory, and budding abolitionist. She's an enrolled member of the Muscogee Creek Nation and is also of Shawnee, Yuchi, Quapaw, and Cherokee descent. Her passion is the intersection of Black and Native American identity. Her activism seeks to normalize, affirm, and uplift the multidimensional identity in both the Black and Native communities through discourse and advocacy around anti-Blackness, abolishing blood quantum, Black liberation, and Indigenous sovereignty. She hopes to encourage Black and Indigenous peoples to prioritize one another and divest from compartmentalizing struggles. She ultimately believes the partnerships between Black and Indigenous people and all POC will aid in the dismantling of anti-Blackness, white supremacy, and settler colonialism globally. In addition to activism, her passions include her family, traveling, reading, researching her ancestry, reconnecting to her tribes, and learning her ancestral languages, and roller skating. So she earned a Bachelor's of Science in General Science, emphasis on biology and anthropology, from the University of Oregon. So welcome to you two. And this conversation, like I said, is just going to be a visit between friends, very casual. So if either of you have any questions for me, please feel free to, just ask me. I'm an open book. First of all, I want to apologize because Keisha, I should have said they, and I used the wrong pronoun. So I'm sorry about that. I will not do that again, but we're all learning here. And I'm also really excited to meet you, Keisha, because I am a big fan of yours. I follow you on the Instagram, and I followed your journey back home up to Saskatchewan, and I can't wait to hear more about that. So actually, let's get started there. Could you maybe describe to us a little bit about your upbringing? Were you raised in your community? Just give us a little background on yourself. Yes, Keisha.
Hi, everyone. I'm Keisha. Can everyone hear me?
Yes, loud and clear.
So a bit about my story. So I'm not a historical Afro-Indigenous person, or I'm not from a historical Afro-Indigenous community. There are historical Afro-Indigenous communities in Canada. I just want to recognize that, or what the land that we now call Canada. For example, the Black Mi'kmaq people on the East Coast are Black Anishinaabe people in Southern Ontario. So I just have one Native parent and one Black parent. So I do want to recognize that. My mom is originally from Jamaica. She was born and raised in Jamaica, and she came here when she was 17. She came to the settler colonial state Canada. My dad is from a northern reserve, a reserve in northern Saskatchewan, and he was put into foster care at a very young age. And he was adopted by a white family in Ontario when he was 9. So I was born in Toronto, Ontario. So that is Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, and Wendat land. And I was born, so my mom and my dad actually did not stay together for a very long period of time. So I was not raised by my biological father, who is Cree. He was very abusive because he experienced a lot of abuse in foster care. So my mom left him, so she moved us to Southern Ontario, to Windsor, Ontario. If anybody knows that, that's right across from Detroit, the fake border, but just right across from Detroit. And then when I was 10, I moved. They moved me to Austria. So I grew up in Europe for a short period of time, for about 4 years. When I was 14, I came back to North America, or Turtle Island. And then I came back to the settler colonial state Canada when I was 17. So my journey really started in terms of like reclaiming my indigeneity. It really started when I came back to Canada and met my my grandmother, my Nokom, for the first time. That was about when I was 21. So I've been kind of on this journey for about 6 years, trying to reconnect and reclaim what has been taken.
Wow, okay. So you grew up in Europe for most of your childhood? So how was that? I don't mean how was that, but let me just say that I recently went on a date with somebody from Budapest, and the whole time he just asked me questions about Native Americans. And it was very awkward and strange, but it kind of pointed to what I find as a trend, which is that there's a lot of romanticization in Europe about the Native experience. So I was just wondering if that's something that came up in your, growing up there.
So it actually didn't come up when I was growing up there. I didn't actually really identify as Native at that time. Like I grew up being status. My stepdad would always use like my status card to get taxes exempts in Ontario. And like I grew up knowing that I was Native, but I would never actually truly connected to being Native when I was, especially when I lived in Europe. So I lived in Europe when I was like 10 to 14. Mm-hmm. Even really connect to my Blackness at that time either. I was really ashamed of it, especially being in Europe, being surrounded by white people. But it has come up in terms of my relationship with my stepfather. He fetishizes like powwows every time he's here. He actually lives in Switzerland right now, but every time he's here, he like always wants to go to powwows with me, always wants to take pictures of people in regalia, always asks me all these questions. And yeah, I also actually recently watched a documentary about how there's Germans doing powwow.
Yeah.
Making regalia and just like dancing powwows.
Yeah, I lived in Lakota country for a little while, and that is a real thing. Germans that just come there and come on like a vacation and like dress up as Native people and have their own powwows by themselves. It's very strange, but I think part of it is growing up watching those Wild West movies and things like that, that kind of. It's interesting that you said that, I guess to them, maybe you were identified to the people you grew up with as Black, probably, which is a different type of fetishization, especially in Europe. So that is a lot to deal with from the ages of 10 to 14. Well, Amber, how about you? Where did you grow up, and how did you identify as a young person?
Hescheya, Amber Tehotefkados, Ishti Leshti Owe, Ome, Ishti Chadi Ome, Ishti Muscogee Ome. So I'm Amber, I'm Black, I'm Native, I'm Muscogee, and I will say that I identify as Afro-Indigenous, but also as a reconnecting Native. I was born in LA from the ages of like 0 to 10. I lived on Tongva land, and then my family, so around my mother's family, because my mother is African American, my dad is Afro-Indigenous. My dad's family is the, Muscogee, Shawnee, Yuchi, Quapaw, all Oklahoma folks. And my dad moved to California, I think when he was like 18, and met my mom there. And so I grew up around my Black family and, enculturated as a Black woman, as a Black child. And, but my dad was always sure to remind me that he would say, "You're Creek." And I'd be like, okay, but like, what does that mean other than you're Creek and you're Native? And I'd say, okay. And I didn't really have a sense of what that, how to be that, and, being around Black folks, which I loved, and I'm grateful to have been enculturated as a Black woman. I think that there was always this sense of, I would tell people, oh, I'm Native. And then I kind of like shrug. And so there was always kind of this, like, I think so. And I think that there's a lot of Black folks too, who were all like, we're Native, or I'm this, mostly out here, I'm Blackfoot. I never really heard Cherokee, but I did hear Black folks say they're Blackfoot.
Yeah.
But I think I've always been reconnecting, since I knew I just didn't know. I don't really know if I understood what reconnecting or even being disconnected meant. At 18 was the first time that I went to Oklahoma, and it was for a family reunion. And our family reunion was on my great grandmother's property, our allotment, which is actually my second great grandma Katie's allotment. And it became really real for me for the first time, like, oh, like maybe I am Muscogee, but I don't know, like I was like mesmerized by it, and still like unsure, and not really knowing how to like operate in that, like I felt like a stranger to an identity that was mine, but I didn't really have any tangible like way of like saying this is what makes me that, other than being my dad's daughter, my grandmother's granddaughter, like it was just kind of like, oh, it's this thing. But I also thought it was so cool, like I was like, oh, this is wonderful. And I'll say that, my mom, I think I put this on social media a while ago, but I remember when I was younger, when we moved here to Portland, to Kalapuya land, my mom bought these like, those velvet pictures that you find in like with, sleazy women or dogs playing pool.
Yeah. Unfortunately.
My mom bought 2 of those, but they had Native folks, and I remember this guy, he was like praying, and there was like a skull, and it was huge. It was like in our living room. And I used to be like, oh my goodness. But my dad was so proud of it. And there was another one with a guy like riding a horse and had like a Native flag, with the Indian feathers, but it was like the flag, and he's like riding away in the wind, and there's like a bear in the background. It's like tacky is all, get up. But what I realized is that was my mom trying to see my dad, saying like, I see you, and like, I recognize who you are. And so I think there were always these little reminders of like, this is who you are. And my dad would always talk about Oklahoma. And so Oklahoma became this like place of like, Oklahoma, like I couldn't wait to like go there and like experience what Oklahoma was. So being 18 and going there for the first time, and being around my grandmother and my great grandmother, who felt so distant, but like I wanted to know them, like I wanted, like that was important to me. So I also think around 18, 19 is when the internet became a thing, like the internet. So you couldn't Google yet, but you could like ask Jeeves, or you could, or you could Yahoo a question, and so I would like look up, at the family reunion, I got this book full of like my ancestors, and I would look at these pictures, and I'd be like, like if I walked by this person, I would not know this was my great grandmother or my great great grandmother. I mean, what we would phenotypically say is Native, like I was like, oh, like it was real. So some of the names I started to ask Jeeves, some like my really like prominent family members from 5 generations back, and just this whole world opened up to me. So you know, like with each year I was like learning a little bit more. And I will say until it wasn't until a couple years ago when my dad passed away, you know, and I felt like I just lost a huge part of myself. I was like longing for a way to stay connected to him, and longing to like know him more deeply, even though I knew him, you know. And so I just asked my grandmother, you know, a couple of days after his funeral, you know, I want to know who I am. I want to know you. Like, I need to know. I'm, you know, I'm in mourning and I'm trying to like grasp at something. And of course she was like, whatever you want, you can ask me whatever you want. And the first question I asked my grandma is, how do you identify, Grandma? Like, how do you see yourself? And she said, I'm an Indian. And I had never even like thought of her. Like, I know this sounds weird, but I knew she was, but maybe I thought she was like, I'm Black and I'm Native, but she was like, I'm an Indian. And I was like, really? And she was like, yeah, my mom is an Indian. My grandmother was an Indian. My great grandma, like, you know, they were all having babies at like 16 and 17 at that time. So there was like 5 generations of like women like who knew each other. And so she was enculturated as a Native woman, and you know, she says as an Indian. So it like blew my mind. And I think that it was her that really gave me the permission, like, or not, maybe permission is not the right word, but maybe just the initiator of like my living authentically as a Black and Native woman, even though I hadn't been quite enculturated as you know, a Muscogee woman. So I think like that, you know, my dad's death was kind of the catalyst in a lot of ways to deciding that this is not something that I need to put to the side or question or second guess, that this is my inheritance. And so like it's my responsibility then to say, if these are my people, if you know, they're saying I'm their people, it's my responsibility to learn what that means. And so I've just been navigating that since, and it's been quite amazing. I feel fulfilled in a way that I hadn't before, because you know, that, you know, inflection of I think I am is gone. You know, like I'm authentically saying this is me. And if that takes a lifelong journey of knowing what that means, that's okay. This is my rite of passage. So there's my ramble.
Yeah, no, it's great. And it actually reminds me of a lot of friends of mine who aren't Black Native, but who didn't grow up in their communities, you know, who were urban natives. And there's a lot of reconnecting that happens for Native people because we deal with so much displacement. Some of us were displaced for a couple generations during, what was it called? Where they actually took people from the reservations and put them in urban communities to try to assimilate them. And so there's people that are a couple generations removed from their tribal communities. And then there are people whose families left their tribal communities in order to find work. And so it's not an unusual story, even if you aren't mixed, to feel this kind of disconnect and to feel like you're living in 2 worlds, you know. For myself, to answer the question, thanks for asking. So I'm Pamunkey, and that we're a first contact tribe. We're Virginia. We're the people that you hear about with Jamestown, and Pocahontas was Pamunkey. Chief Powhatan was the chief, the paramount chief over 36 small Confederate nation, or not Confederate, that's not what I mean, 36 nations under his confederacy. And so as a first contact tribe, you know, we're triracial in many ways. We started mixing pretty early on. But there was a period of time when the Virginia government would actually take the land of Native people who were a way of land grabbing was to sort of say this community is now too Black. And so you could actually accuse like a neighboring white town could accuse a reservation town of becoming too mulatto. And then there would be a court case, and they would actually take the land away and disband the tribe. And so because of this, a lot of Native communities in Virginia and in different parts of the South, like North Carolina, South Carolina, started to purge people who either associated with Black people or were too dark or married Black people. And my community, we were one of the last people to have our original land. Our reservation goes back to the 1600s, and it was given under actually the English crown before there was an America. And so in order to deal with this threat, they created the Black codes, the Black laws, that meant that if you even associated with Black people, even though like technically we all probably have some African ancestry because of, just you're around people, and African people are beautiful and Native people are beautiful, and we see each other, we fall in love. But also so there was a point where they said, we can't do this anymore. And anybody who crosses this line will be disbanded. They will have to leave the tribe. And so I have an ancestor who, during Reconstruction, was actually put in office in Virginia, in the Virginia Senate. And he created a school for newly freed slaves on our land. And because of that, there was like a period of time when we were basically cut off from the tribe. And so our land is still in Virginia. It actually borders the reservation. And we are historical Pamunkeys. He's a historical Pamunkey, according to the Library of Virginia and according to the historian of the tribe. But we have not been recognized citizens for about 100 years, I would say. And so my family, I grew up in Philadelphia for my young childhood, also urban, which is where a lot of Pamunkeys and other natives from Virginia would go to get work. Like that was the big city. And so I grew up also like you guys, kind of knowing that I was Pamunkey. My grandfather I grew up with my grandparents. They made that very clear, my grandfather, that we were Pamunkey. So I knew that. And I remember being 5 years old and trying to fly. I had a box and some balloons, and I was trying to fly away from home. And I said I was going to India and I was going to Africa because I was Black and Indian. And I had to go. And they were like, it's not what that means. Not from India. But anyway, so I knew that I was Black and Indian. I knew that we were Pamunkey, but I also felt that there must be some sort of a disconnect, because my grandfather, when he would talk about it, he would seem very sad. And so fast forward to being a teenager, and I was also online, and I was looking up, my tribe and trying to figure out, like, why aren't I enrolled? Like, why aren't we members of this tribe? And I actually found the Black laws online because someone had written about them on a web page. I also found my family in the history of the tribe. When I was looking, I was just like, okay, so clearly this is what happened. This must be what happened. And as I got older and got more, but got closer to my extended family, I come from a really small family, but our extended Dungey family is huge. And I found out, our family reunions are on the reservation. We go there and we we go to the graves there, and you know, we still have that land in our family that we also have our reunions on. And the family members that stayed in Virginia stayed very much a part of the Native community. But at the same time, knowing that our community, our Native community, was in fact still very racist and is till this day. And so my journey has been, you know, literally trying to reinstate our family as tribal enrolled members, and to have our history within the tribe recognized. But also, I've been able to, thankfully, since being a teenager, be involved in the Native community outside of my tribe. So I lived in New York. I went to college in New York, and I spent a lot of time at the American Indian Center there, the American Indian House there. But I've always had this feeling like I can't really be fully engaged until I'm enrolled. Like, I just always felt like it's not just who you claim, but who claims you, you know what I mean? And to be a part of a community is not just me saying, you know, this is my heritage, but it's actually to be a living part of the community. And so that's something that I yearn for, and it's something that my family, you know, works toward. But just like you're saying, you know, there was a disconnect, even though in our case it was a true, like, you're banished. But I think we all three of us are working through some sort of disconnect, whether it's personal, like in Keisha's situation with her father, or whether it's generational, like in your situation, or whether it's just racism, like in my situation. But yeah, it's, you know, it's complicated dealing with multiple identities, that's for sure. So would you guys say that your desire to reconnect with your Native identity was supported in your families and in your community? Or would you say that was also a struggle for you? We can start with you, Keisha, if you want.
So in terms of my family, in terms of like, I started reconnecting like 17, 18. I started trying to build a relationship with my biological father. And my mom was like very like, she would say like, no, I don't want you talking to him. I bumped into him at a powwow, and that was the first time I saw him in like 8 years. I saw my youngest half sibling. She was 3 at the time. She's also Black Native, and she was dancing jingle dress. So that kind of initiated like my journey into starting to reclaim like who I am. But after my mom passed away, I kind of understood more why she didn't want me talking to my biological father. I found out from my sister that like, he started sexually assaulting her around the time that my sister was born. So that's been a struggle in terms of like my sister being against me talking to her father, and my mom having been against me talking to my father as well. In terms of my relatives, in terms of like my grandmother who's still on reserve, a lot of my relatives actually didn't know about me. They knew my dad has 6 children. They knew my dad had 6 children, but they didn't actually know anything about us. So the first time that my grandmother met me, she was surprised that I was Black. Yeah, so it was very interesting.
What was her reaction to that? Was it just, I mean, you said she's surprised. Was there a negative reaction, or was it just, I just didn't know?
It was both. I could sense like that she would have preferred if I wasn't. She's coming around. She has to. But like, I feel like, yeah, there's such a negative imagery, especially within like Cree culture and like Ojibwe culture with like Blackness. There's such like a negative association with Blackness itself. So I feel like that has also been interesting navigating. I'm so sorry, I actually forgot the question.
No, it's fine. You're answering it. I mean, I was asking, do you feel like reconnecting, if you felt supported in your reconnecting? But it sounds like similar to my situation, there is some, I don't know, like resistance to the fact that you're mixed with Black specifically. And you mentioned that you feel like there's like negative association with Blackness in Cree Ojibwe culture. Do you have any sense of where that comes from? I ask this because a friend of mine who's Navajo was talking to me about this and said that their first interaction with Black people was Buffalo Soldiers who were sent there specifically to move them off of their land. And so that alone was enough for them to, you know, I mean, I personally think that was strategic on the part of the white government, the white settler state, that they were like, you know, we have all these Black men with guns after the Civil War, and what do we do with them? We don't want them hanging out where we are, so we're going to send them to the West to like tame the West, but also so that those people, the first time they interact with each other, it's a relationship of tension and of violence. Yes. So that there can't be any solidarity, because I feel like solidarity was just like what happened in Virginia, solidarity between Blacks and Natives was always a threat to the settler state. I know in Virginia, it definitely was. I mean, we had slave revolts. We had revolts that were Natives and Blacks together. And also Natives were allowed on their reservations to have weapons. And so anytime there were Black people running away to Native reservations, my reservation was one of these reservations that would allow you to run away and just hang out with the Native people until you felt like going back to your master. Well, that was a threat, because Black people weren't, even free Black people weren't supposed to have weapons. So if you have free Black communities interacting with Native communities and on their land, they could have access to guns. And that literally, I've seen documents where white people were saying this is a problem. So I was just wondering if, you know, if you feel like there's some historic reason, or if it's just like maybe they're watching television and they're picking up what white people are serving about Black people.
Yeah, I'm not really sure in terms of like my community. It's pretty far north. They haven't really had a lot of they haven't really been in a lot of relation with like Black people in northern Saskatchewan. So I'm actually not sure, but I feel like it's still like it's anti-Blackness. I just don't know where it comes from. I think it comes from a lot of stories. A lot of Cree people, the name that they have for Black people is gaskatawiwias, which is burnt meats. So there's just like, I'm not sure how they got the information. Yeah. But like also like Natives had they talked, right? It traveled. Yeah. I'm not sure.
No, I mean, I think anti-Blackness is so pervasive in our society that if you don't meet a Black person and you're learning about Black people from, you know, whatever media, you know, I remember also listening to NPR, and I guess there was a shooting, I think it was on White Earth, maybe, I don't remember, but in Minnesota, there was a shooting, a Native boy shot, you know, up his high school, and they interviewed an elder in the community and said, where do you think this is coming from? And she said, they're learning it from the Black people. Of course, we found out that, first of all, no black student has ever done a school shooting. So how would that be the case? But we found out that he was actually on white supremacist websites. So he was actually learning the violence from white people. But the first thing that came into her mind was Black people. And she said, because, you know, they see the videos, they see the music videos, so she was learning, you know, she was learning about Black people and our culture from white media, and the fears that was creating, to the point where she thought that that's what was ruining the kids in her community. So I do think Native people, you know, especially if they're in a rural place where they're not interacting with Black people, they're going to pick up on anti-Blackness like anyone else. So Amber, it sounds like from what you described, your family was very supportive of you. But how about the community itself? Like, do you feel like it's been supportive in your reconnection?
I would say yes for the most part. So in reconnecting, I'm thinking about how do I do this? And so, I'm calling the tribe and, making sure I have like all my ancestors, they were, finding as much information from like our cultural department. But, that's only one part of it. The other part is the actual cultural stuff. Like I want to learn, I want to go to ceremony. I want to, like, what are my responsibilities to the tribe, right? And so when I call the tribe, they're kind of like, you have to know people. So the tribe kind of represents just like the political aspect of, it's not the everyday, like what it means to be, Muscogee, right? And so I feel like when dealing with the tribe, they definitely help with, like right now we're having COVID support, I can call them and say, hey, there's a COVID grant, I want to apply. So it's like all that bureaucracy stuff. And even though our tribal government, is like there's a replication of like ceremony and how things are set up inside like the tribal center. The real stuff is with the people. And so like when I was trying to reconnect early, I was like, how do I do this? And I was just told you gotta know people. And that was like a little bit discouraging to me because I'm like, where do I start? Like like you said, I've been geographically disconnected, and I have other than my grandmother, I don't really know where to start. So I feel like online is where I really was able to start to connect. I feel like, so the reason why my name is Melanin Muscogee online is because I was trying to be discreet and I was trying to kind of hide and just be like there to listen, so I would just find other Muscogee people, follow the hashtag Muscogee and just like follow people and be in the background like and then try to engage. And people were super kind for the most part. I feel like a lot of what I know now is because of the people who I built relationship with. And I think that the lesson in that is that this is about kinship. It is about relationship. And so even though it's my responsibility to do the work, I need my kin, I need my relatives to like help me because I'm like a little kid. Like I don't know anything. And I'm trying my best as a grown ass woman to like learn what this means. And so I read a lot of books, I go online, but it's nothing like being in a relationship where people are teaching you and giving you access to what, the sacred as you are being responsible to your journey, right? So that's why I say I think it's like a rite of passage for me in a lot of ways. Definitely I've seen some anti-Black stuff, even, in Muscogee groups, and that is frustrating, not discouraging because I refuse. Like I just don't accept it. Like I'm like, and I think in a lot of ways, my responses early on, my little memes were in responses to stuff that I would hear in groups, and I'd be like, oh. But then I realized, like, for me, reconnecting wasn't just about reconnecting to being Muscogee, but also to other, like, Afro-Indigenous folks who were, like, navigating this stuff, like building community and kinship with other Black Native folks, even if they weren't in my tribe, but just to like say, I see you and I know this journey is hard and people will, and authenticate you because you're racialized as Black. And, a lot of my early stuff was just that, wanting to speak to other, like being in community with other Black natives and just, say, I see you. So yes and no. I'm really grateful to like all the relatives who have helped me navigate what it means to be Muscogee. And even now, like I have a lot of relatives right now who are helping me with my reconnection to being Quapaw now that I know my exact family lineage. But quick story is, I was one of my relatives, Quapaw relatives, like, oh, well, you should enroll in the tribe because we allow dual citizenship. And she says, as long as even though you may not have birth certificates, if you have a relative who is like a direct descendant, you guys can do a genetic test. And so this relative, I think our grandfathers were brothers. So my grandfather was the first non-hereditary chief, and his brother, we're distant cousins. And so she's like, you know, you could just take a genetic test. But she said, but the only thing is that even if we're proven to be relatives, you'll still have to go before council and they get to decide the final say. Now, imagine what my first thought is.
Yeah,
they're going to see me and be like, even though my grandfather was the chief, they're going to see me. And, you know, like just having to think that thought, you know, not knowing for sure makes me like, is this worth it? Like, is enrollment the goal? You know, do I just stick with like, I'm a descendant of Quapaw, you know? And I'm not saying that to say that, you know, to already judge the Quapaw Nation. I'm not. It's just like, as a Black Native, I'm already guarded with like, is reconnecting to my Quapaw heritage this like formal way? Is it worth it? You know? And I feel you, Azie, when you talk about needing that like the other side to recognize you and to be in community, because it's not just about who you claim. Even though I can show them like, this is my grandpa, there's something about wanting people to say, yes, we acknowledge you. But at the same time, if you're going to choose to be anti-Black, like, do I want to be in a relationship with you? Like, it's so hard.
Amber, my mother said that to me. She was like, is there an echo? Sorry.
A little bit, but we can hear you.
Okay. She was like, why would we want to be with people that don't want us? You know, and I thought about it because it's true. But it's also unjust. And I don't know. If I claim to be for justice, racial justice, I have to hold my people accountable for that too, you know. And there are also a lot of children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren of the people holding these views that are looking more and more like us, you know. And I thought about that when I guess, where was that? Somebody said something to me when I was in Lakota country, and I was just like, you know, this person's grandchild is going to end up looking like me, like, and they're going to have to face this about themselves, you know. And also, I want to pave the way for them as well. But also to get to our next point, which is, what does solidarity mean? You know, solidarity, I think, is one of the most powerful things we have against the settler state. And they robbed us of that on purpose. So like I was saying, in Virginia and in other places, like with the Seminole in Florida and in other situations, when we got together, it was very powerful because one, it was numbers, but two, it was, I think, an alternative way for Black people to look at living here on Turtle Island, is to say, okay, well, if this isn't working for us, the settler state's not working for us, who are the real people who legitimately this is their land, you know? And I think if Black people saw Native people as legitimate owners and then legitimate nation states on this land, and Native people saw Black people as, you know, refugees who are running away from an oppressive and exploitative system, we could be very powerful together, you know, acknowledging who we really are to each other and fighting against, you know, this insane colonial system that we found ourselves in. So in that way, you know, we have to go into our communities and say, look at us, we are real, we are here, there's a reason we exist. And, you know, and what can we do from here? So what do you think are some barriers toward that goal, toward Blacks and Natives coming together in a real, I mean, I see that it's happening, because I don't know if you follow, I mean, even within, as we're talking about the BLM movement, I've seen even BLM speakers who first acknowledge the traditional owners of the land that they're on, like in Chicago and in Philadelphia and in New York. Like they started their speeches with, you know, this is Lenape land, you know, and things like that. And definitely we've seen Native people show up for Black people. We saw Black people show up at Standing Rock as well, and even Black celebrities came. So what do you think, how do we get to the next level? Like, how do we continue that and make sure that that continues to happen? Because there's also a lot of resistance to that on both sides. I'm going to start with Amber, just only because this is something you talk about all the time. And I think you can help us, Keisha and I, to figure out like where to go.
Okay, now that you're asking me to solve a big
well, yeah, I'm sorry, but that's what you set yourself up for.
But I'm glad, you know, I was just gonna use your tweet about like, you know, Native folks recognizing Black folks as refugees. When you tweeted that, I was just like, this is so brilliant. It is so brilliant. Because a lot of times we talk about reparations, we talk about, you know, that Black folks should be getting this 40 acres and a mule. But I think that conversation without recognizing that this is sovereign Indigenous land is incomplete. It again erases, you know, Indigenous peoples, which we as Black people understand oppression should know, like that's unacceptable, right? But you know, I think what you said about these examples of where Black folks and Native folks were getting together, you know, they represented a threat to this colonial project. We have always been, as you know, two groups working together, a threat to this system. And the intentionality of using us for lateral violence to distract us in our trauma against one another is on purpose. You know, like you said, the Buffalo Soldiers, and even with the 5 tribes, you know, when, you know, the excuse I hear is Native folks own slaves. And I think I think it's incomplete to say Native folks owned slaves, enslaved Black folks. There were groups of Native folks who did, but we have to understand that in context of the settler state using coercion, treaties, war, trauma, you know, starvation,
intermarriage as well.
Encouraging Native folks, Native nations to participate in chattel because they understood that if Black folks had a place of refuge, the settler project would collapse, right? And so I totally agree with you when it comes to that. I think we have to keep talking about it. We have to keep speaking to it. I think that we have to challenge the narrative of white supremacy and settler colonialism, and I think we can't. That's incomplete without also including racial capitalism, racial predatory capitalism, because Black and Native folks were meant to be commodity, utility, or in cases where it didn't work, destroyed. Right? This settler project was built on top of us, on top of our bodies, on top of our lands, and I think until we have those real discussions with each other, and also speak to the trauma. Let's speak to the trauma, but in the context of the settler project. I don't have an answer to like fixing it all, but I think that if we want an authentic, sovereign, Indigenous future and an authentic, liberated Black future, we have to deal with our trauma. We have to talk to each other. We have to see each other. And hear each other. So, you know, the other day I posted something about when Black folks say Black Lives Matter. For Native folks, the response shouldn't be, well, Native lives matter, because Blackness is not a threat to indigeneity. Blackness didn't create the settler state. Blackness cannot oppress like indigeneity. Like the idea of putting us on the same level as the settler state I think is wrong. Like, yeah, it's not even valid. And so it doesn't mean that we can't address trauma. It doesn't mean that we can't say, yes, that happened. I don't think that at any point we should like disregard that trauma has happened, because I think that doesn't help in our, you know, move towards this like future that we're hoping for. But I don't think that we should be accusing each other of something the settler state has authored, has, you know, perpetuated. but we've all learned anti-Blackness. We've all learned to erase Indigenous people, right? Those are in our narrative. So we need to challenge what we believe about white supremacy. We need to challenge that white supremacy is an authentic thing, right? This is a narrative that we've all just perpetuated. And in a lot of ways, you know, sometimes it was about survival, but I think that is so important that we don't see each other as the enemy, that we don't see each other as the authors of our oppression. That's not true, right? So I think we just have to keep talking about it. We have to keep exposing white supremacy for what it is. Like, you know, in the context of, you know, settler colonialism, white supremacy, and racial capitalism, I think we have to make sure whenever we're speaking to it, we're understanding that triangle, right? One cannot exist without the other. They depend on each other to keep perpetuating this system. And if we are believing what white supremacy says about one another, we're going to continue lateral oppression. So clearly I'm passionate about this, but I'm going to go ahead and turn down the
Well, we have to be passionate about it because we are it.
Right. Like, we are that intersection. Like, right. I feel like we're the personification of that fight, right? Like us as Black natives, a lot of times we don't have choice. We can run from it if we want to, but I think that it doesn't make it go away, right? And so for those of us who are willing to say something, to be brave, like it does take us to be brave in a lot of ways. There's times where I'm like about to post something and I'm like, do I want to say this? Like, I'm just,
no, it's true. It's like whenever I'm in community that's all Black, I feel like I gotta be the voice of the Native people because, and then when I'm in community that's all Native, I gotta be the voice of, because there's so much misinformation and so many ways that we miss each other. Like you were just saying about, well, Native people own slaves, and it's like, okay, well, the five civilized tribes, there were 5 out of 500, first of all, over 500.
Exactly. Such a small percentage.
You know, it was introduced by a lot of for most of them, it was introduced by the white gentry that married Native women and brought their ways into the tribe and changed so much of their relationship with the land, and also their relationship with economy, and chattel slavery was one of those things. They also thought that doing that would help them to keep their land in many ways, because the settler state was saying, the more you assimilate, the more we'll leave you alone. You know, literally when I was saying the thing earlier about how the Virginia government would come in and say, well, you're too Black and we'll take your land. One of the other excuses was you're not using the land enough. So they would accuse a tribe of they're not using their land. So to use your land was to have farms in the way that white people have, and to have Black people working on them. And so there are ways that we had to survive. And then on the other hand, we have things like the Hampton Institute, which was a Black HBCU that was used as an assimilation ground for children of prisoners of war of Western tribes were brought to Virginia and to this Black HBCU to be completely for cultural genocide. Yeah. And they specifically did that because they said, okay, and you could read about this, guys. You could look up the Hampton Indian School. And first of all, you'll see that some of my ancestors were there, but also you'll see that they actually had their own philosophy that if you pit Native students against Black students, it makes them both assimilate at a higher rate, because the Native students look at the Black students and they say, oh, they're talking better than they're speaking English better than we are. They're more, you know, they'll look at them in a jealous way because they're getting ahead faster. And the Black students will look at the Native students and say, well, at least we aren't that poor. At least we have, you know, this and that, and we're a couple steps ahead. And so they actually help each other in the assimilation process by creating this tension between the two communities. And the reason that the Hampton Institute actually stopped the Indian school was because the Indian kids and the Black kids were starting to have like sexual relationships, and they were dating, and then they said, "Oh, never mind, this is failure," and they ended the Indians. I'm not even kidding. This is really what happened in the late 1800s, and so we see that they've always found ways to pit us against each other, so that we would not work together against them. So let's see, what else was that? What else were we going to talk about, guys?
Keisha, do you have anything?
Keisha. Going back to your, no, I'm so, like I said, I'm so interested in your kind of what I think is your journey home a little bit right now, because are you living on your ancestral land at this point? Is it the first time in your life that you've lived there? Okay, so what do you see as? I know it's a different situation in Canada in many ways, but what do you see solidarity between the Black and Black community and your community? Like, where do you see that heading, or what would you like to see in the future?
So yeah, I've seen like a lot of organizers starting to build coalitions with each other, and especially within Toronto. I was living in Toronto before I came to Northern Saskatchewan, my homeland. But like BMLTO, Black Lives Matter Toronto chapter, they started showing up for Indigenous people since like 2015. I saw them at like rallies and protests and in solidarity, and they've done a lot of good work there already. But I guess it's very different in Northern Saskatchewan, because they've been like taught all these negative stereotypes about Black people, like through the media, and they actually had never built relationships with Black people up here, like on my reserve. Like, my cousins always joke that I'm probably the first Black person to have come on the reserve. So it's a very different situation, and even with like Natives across the country and like Black folks as well, like I think we're just so caught up, validly caught up in our own like struggles and oppression, that we don't have the capacity to learn about other struggles. So I find that kind of like a barrier to building solidarity, because even when it comes to myself, like I feel like sometimes I don't have the capacity to learn about like the injustices that are happening globally, because I'm too caught up in like my own being Black and Native and like non-binary. I'm too caught up in that, because I can't even deal with all my marginalized identities on my own. So we definitely need to stop allowing settler colonial states to pit us against each other, but that takes a lot of communication. That takes a lot of reflecting how we've been complicit in each other's traumas and perpetuated each other's stuff.
So brilliant.
Oh, it's brilliant, and it is like you're saying, it's exhausting, and I think one of the reasons in the last maybe 20 years we haven't seen as much solidarity is because we have different needs, that are in different contexts, a lot of rural versus urban, and in different, we have different needs. We're at different places, and it is overwhelming to try to wrap your head around someone else's issues, but it's important to do. And on that actually brings me to a question I wanted to ask you about your two-spirit identity. Besides the dealing with idiots like me who who misgender you, even though I practice literally so much, and I'm so sorry. But no, I it's an awareness that I'm increasing in my own life, because I draw from my Indigenous. I mean, the way we've been colonized to understand gender has really just been detrimental to all of us. And but I've been reading more and more about the many genders that our people had. We did not have two genders. We had an understanding of multiple genders that was very it was very integrated into our worldview, and our sense of our social sense and all that. It's not something we had to learn, like I have to learn it now. So how has that been part of your reconnecting experience, being able to understand yourself in the Indigenous understanding of gender? Like, is in other words, has that helped you in any way? Like, has it been a complication? Because the other thing I've read is that now, a lot of people who aren't Indigenous use the Two-Spirit identity and don't understand it and don't honor it in the way that it needs to be understood. So I'm just wondering, like you're saying, you've got a lot of intersections happening here, and just what does your indigeneity bring to your sense of gender, your understanding of gender? Oh, I can't hear you. I think.
For the longest time, I didn't identify as Two-Spirit. So now I'm starting to say that I'm reclaiming a Two-Spirit identity. I do identify as non-binary still, and it's still a very Western concept. But for me, it was so important to be connected to community, because a Two-Spirit identity comes with the roles and responsibilities that are given from community. So it's about kinship. It's about relationships. So I forgot the question.
I was wondering, has that being a part of your journey? From my own point of view, my understanding of gender has been greatly broadened by my reconnection to my indigeneity, if that makes sense, because I understand we embrace multiple genders. We did not have this binary. So I was just wondering if that's been something that's been helpful to you in your journey, or if that, if you don't see it like that, I'm projecting on you. And that's totally fine if you don't. I was, discussion about that.
I feel like it's definitely been more of a complication to my journey, especially dealing with homophobia and transphobia within our communities now that was not there before colonization. Our Black communities and Indigenous communities were not like this, but now dealing with that as well, it's kind of more of a complication. In urban settings, there's more Two-Spirited people, there's more Indigenous people who are queer and trans, but then when I'm back on my reserve, I kind of keep that identity hidden. Because I'm already seen as kind of like an outsider because of my Blackness. So I don't want to add that on top of everything else. So I feel like that's been again, I feel like I don't even have a capacity to deal with all my intersections. Mm-hmm. So it's been a struggle.
Yeah, guys, we have a lot of struggle. I think I want us all to come away from this understanding that you really stand with your Black and Indigenous and queer friends, because we're going through a lot.
Can I wanted to add something about, I was on a panel yesterday and we were asked that question of how do we deal with solidarity? How do we build solidarity amongst one another? And my co-panelist, Dr. Kyle, who's also Afro-Indigenous, said that I think he was speaking to an elder or something around a problem he was having with someone else. And the elder said, why don't you feed them? And start as a sense of let's sit down and have a meal and let's talk to each other, because meals can break these kind of tensions that we have sometimes, and that maybe we should be sharing more dinners with one another and having conversations about how we unify. And I thought it was a really good idea because I like to eat, and I know there's other people who like to eat, so might as well talk about our troubles over some really good food. And maybe that's one step, that's one way to forward the revolution is through food.
Well, finding common ground.
Yes.
And also our food traditions, Black, especially in America, Black and Indigenous food traditions are very linked.
Absolutely.
We all have cornbread.
Soul food is so rooted. One of my friends talks about this, how soul food is, when you think about it, a lot of it is traditional Southeast Native foods, collards and cornbread and black eyed peas. All those things are traditions probably learned in community with one another, in maroon villages and when enslaved folks ran away. So I think that we have to start seeing each other through, not through that white supremacist lens, not through that colonial lens, because that's not who we really are. This is not our inheritance. Like, you know, we live outside of oppression, even though we have been, you know, under this oppressive state. Like, we exist outside of oppression. So.
Mm-hmm. Well, and on that note, I mean, this might be too broad, but when we say we live outside of oppression, it makes me think, like, have you guys considered your identity on a global scale? Like I don't know, this is like a very broad question.
Absolutely.
But
no,
I know for me, when I travel, well, we talked about living in Europe and things like that, but also one of the best, well, first of all, I learned about white indigeneity when I went to Scotland and was on a tour, and they were talking about pre-Christian, you know, their pre-colonized, pre-Christian way of living, which was in clans and in tribes. And then he pointed out the window and pointed to, you know, like a mountain or whatever, and he called it something. I don't know the word, but it meant the breast of the mother, and because they called the earth Mother Earth. And I was just like, wait, what? Like, oh yeah, you guys, and also in Iceland, I had this experience, like, that there is, you know, and there is an indigeneity to the European experience that they aren't connected to, that they should probably reconnect to. And then also on my travels to Australia and seeing how the Black Lives Matter movement manifests there when they're both Black and Indigenous in the way that I am. And that was such a powerful experience for me, because it didn't feel like I had to take sides. I was like, we're all both, right? But they come against the same issues with anti-Blackness, anti-Indigenousness. And so you guys had experiences, you know, or how do you feel like this, we can comment on the global experience of anti-Blackness, anti-Indigeneity? I don't know, like I said, it might be too broad, but.
No, I mean, I think that I oftentimes try to speak to, like, global Black liberation and global Indigenous sovereignty, because white supremacy, settler colonialism, and racial capitalism are global projects, right? We can see how they have been, like, a lot of it was, like, rooted in, like, early Europe, but, like, the capitalist part happened here with, like, commodifying Black folks, right? And so I think that we have to look at how this global project has been, like, franchised all over the world, and it may look different, but at the root of most of it is, like, anti-Blackness and anti-indigeneity, the theft of land, transporting whiteness to the world, and replicating this, like, idea that whiteness is the default. And so I think that especially us here in the US, we have to be mindful of how we center ourselves as Indigenous folks and Black folks, and speak over, you know, the narratives of other Indigenous and Black folks outside of the context of the US, because I think that we oftentimes center ourselves as, like, the one with the, you know, it's, we have the answers, but I think we should be looking broadly at how, like, these different struggles around the world are, you know, dismantling the same systems we're dismantling, and that we aren't exceptionalists under, like, that American idea. And so I think it's really important that we think globally about how we're dismantling systems, and how us here with our privilege, how we speak over and speaking to, you know, other people's struggles, even though it's, like, the same thing as far as, like, white supremacy, settler colonialism, and all that. So I think it's really important that we're always thinking globally about how we're dismantling systems, but that we here, you know, as, like, American, not even just Turtle Island, like, I'm thinking about, like, how we might be speaking over, you know, our relatives up north and in the Caribbean and the global South and, you know, Mexico. We need to understand that sovereignty to those places are legit, and that we shouldn't be exporting our ideas to folks around the world, but that we should be in solidarity and in support.
Right, and we shouldn't be reiterating these racial caste systems that we've been handed down. Like, I think we've talked about this, Amber, in our DM chats because I'm all up in Amber's DMs.
You're welcome. Come on up.
But I will be in yours too, Keisha. Don't worry. But that you know, that we've experienced Black people saying that people in Australia, Black Indigenous people in Australia, Aboriginal people can't be considered Black because they're not part of the diaspora of West African slavery.
Oh my goodness.
And we're like, come on, like what are you talking about? Like this, like that. This is not helping, and it's completely misunderstanding.
They were racialized as Black. They are
literally racialized as Black. They're literally called the N-word and everything else. And you can't go to some other country and project your what you need to do is like you're saying, if you're going to go to another country and project anything, project the idea that, you know, colonialism has messed us all up.
All of us.
And that we're all kind of in the same boat here. But also allow their history and their context to be their history and their context. Like, we can't, lateral violence gets us nowhere. But I think what I was also trying to say is that white people need to also be exercised of this idea of whiteness, because they are indigenous to their place and they don't need to take sage. Guys, you don't need sage. You have you have rosemary, you have lavender, like you have your own ways and your own, you know, and so the more that we understand the colonial project, as you're saying, the more we can move forward in solidarity with our kinspeople, Black and Native, and also white. I'm sure we all have that ancestry in us as well. So
really quickly,
please do.
Really quick. But you speaking of like white indigeneity, James Baldwin speaks to this specifically in that, like, when white folks came here, you know, when they immigrated here, they had to trade their indigeneity. They weren't white before; they were Irish or German or something else. But that in coming here, they were required to trade that in for whiteness as a currency to be able to navigate the white supremacist settler colonial racial capitalist project. And so that in that they have failed to stay connected to their sense of indigeneity. And so I think that when we speak to indigeneity, oftentimes we're speaking about like Native Americans, but I think that we have to be willing to, like, for white folks to say, like, I'm indigenous to here. And I've had this conversation on Twitter and someone's like, well, I could be indigenous to Ireland. And I said, you sure could. Like, the idea that is possible.
Yes,
like,
they've reclaimed their language.
Yes.
I mean, they had reclamation projects just like we do to reclaim the original Celtic languages, because they were, like we're saying, the first colonial projects were they did on themselves, each other. So so anyway, that's important too. It's a footnote though, because they're doing fine. But at the same time, you know, I don't know, I think it's important because we started this conversation talking about Germans coming to make a powwow, and I feel like, come on, Germans,
you don't need to.
You don't need to. They had drumming. You know, I saw the Viking series. Y'all had drums. So anyway, so I think it's about time. Is it about time? Oh no, we still have time. I thought it was about time. All right. Well, what else do we want to talk about?
I don't know.
Okay. Well, are there any questions we have from our lovely
someone asked if we are Native, and I think we should respond by saying yes, we are.
Somebody asked if we're Native?
Yes, someone asked if we three are Native, and
well, maybe they showed up a little late. Well, yes. I mean, we can reintroduce ourselves and our tribe. So my name's Azie, and I am obviously Black, and I'm also Pamunkey, which is a nation in Virginia. It's the people of Powhatan and Pocahontas. And we have our reservation is outside of Richmond. So that's my people. I'm also a Nanticoke descendant, but I don't really talk about that as much because I'm not as in touch with that aspect of my culture. But on my grandmother's side, we're Nanticoke as well, from Maryland. And Keisha, why don't you reintroduce yourself, just because people have forgotten.
Hi everyone, my name is Keisha. I'm Black, obviously, too. I am Nîhithaw. I'm within Cree from Treaty 6 territory and a band member of the Black Laurentian Indian Band. But yeah, band system is colonial, so I don't know. I want to start identifying outside of like being like part of like the Indian registry.
Mm.
Yeah, and I've noticed that like Maori people like identify like their family's mountain, and I've noticed that's like a beautiful way to like to show connection to place. Because like yeah, like this band system wasn't around when like 100, 200 years ago. So I've been like thinking about that. But yeah, sorry.
Well, Keisha, that is what we were talking about, thinking globally.
Oh.
That's part of that, you know, like looking at our Maori relatives and how, you know, we all were colonialized in different ways, and we've kept different things, and we can learn from each other, you know, and that's beautiful to have a mountain. I want a mountain. I don't have a mountain. We don't have a mountain. We barely have
any mountains in Virginia.
We have homes. And Amber, you can tell me.
Yeah. Esche Amber Chehotefkados. Ishti Leshti Ome, Ishti Chadi Ome, Ishti Muscogee Oe. And I just said, I'm a Black person, I'm a Native person, and I'm a Muscogee person. And clearly I'm Black. And yeah, I think if you came late, like we're discussing Afro-Indigeneity, but we're discussing, you know, all these, you know, global issues around anti-Blackness and, you know, anti-Indigeneity and settler colonialism and all that stuff. So I think someone says, do we do this all the time on our social media?
We talk a lot about this on our social media. Yeah, I mean, what did you say, Keisha? Did you say something?
I said I don't.
But you be calling people out.
I mean, I know people.
Oh yeah, true.
That's what they were doing, but apparently Keisha also makes great jewelry.
So do you, Azie.
Oh, thank you. I made these earrings.
Yeah, I could tell. I was like, I know. I was like, those are the.
I've never worn them before.
There's
but I was gonna say, I think, you know, to end this discussion, which we have to do, unfortunately now, I just wanted to say that anybody watching, you know, please show up for your Black and Native relatives, because like Keisha was saying, we have a lot of struggles, and this has been a really difficult time. I know for me personally, with everything going on in the country and seeing Black and Native lives under such attack, you know, it's like, it's double trauma in many ways. And the struggles that we also happen to go through in spaces that are Indigenous that can be anti-Black, and spaces that are Black that can be anti-Indigenous. If you see that happening, you know, please, you know, be an advocate for your Black and Native brothers and sisters. I mean, my family, like I shared before, is going through a personal battle with our tribe chief and council when it comes to enrollment because of anti-Black, historic anti-Black racism. And I have family and friends who are tribal members who I do, you know, feel could do more in standing in solidarity and advocacy. And like we're saying, kinship is the basis of our community. And it's so for us, kinship is kinship with our Black community and our Native community. And we want you to have kinship with each other as well. So yeah, thank you all for watching. This has been a wonderful, at least I've enjoyed it, between two beautiful souls and me. This has been the Indigenous People Festival's BLM Black and Native Solidarity panel. Thanks so much to the panelists for the conversation. And please stay tuned, everybody who's watching, for the Native Podcaster panel. That sounds good, which is coming at 3 p.m. Pacific time. Well, thank you so much, Keisha. And thank you, Amber, for being with me. I'll see you in your DMs.
Bye. Bye.